Good morning, I'm Arabelle McClure.
And I'm Killian McMahon.
Alice Paul, an iron-jawed angel. I never doubted that equal rights was the right direction. Most reforms, most problems are complicated. But to me, there's nothing complicated about ordinary Alice Paul.
Alice Stokes Paul and her associate Lucy Burns were revolutionary suffragist leaders in Washington, D.C. during the early 1900s. They changed the methods of protesting with their aggressive but nonviolent tactics. By organizing their own suffrage association, the National Woman's Party, which protested by picketing the White House, they became highly influential in the movement.
Paul and Burns were key players in the passage of the 19th Amendment on June 4, 1919, finally granting women the right to vote and thus leaving their legacy. Without their tireless efforts, women may not have the right to vote today. I was raised a Quaker in Morristown, New Jersey. It was because of this that I always seemed to believe in equality. While I was growing up, my mother attended many suffragist speeches and took me with her. I was fascinated by how these strong women stood up for their cause despite the struggles they had to face.
In the 1800s, women were generally stereotyped as the lesser gender. They didn't share many of the rights that men were able to enjoy, including the right to vote. When abolitionist women like Elizabeth Cady Stanton tried to speak out in the anti-slavery movement, they were silenced, so they started a movement of their own.
On July 19th and 20th, 1848, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Lucretia Mott held the first suffrage meeting ever, the Seneca Falls Convention in Seneca Falls, New York.
This fostered a chain of suffrage movements, including the formation of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, or the NASA. Although people of the time saw women's suffrage as an unimportant issue, suffragists kept trying.
While these events were occurring in the United States, Alice left for England to continue her education. There will never be a new world order until women are a part of it. Alice Paul.
Alice moved to England in 1907 to continue her studies in social work. While there, she met Emmeline and Christabel Pankhurst, British militant suffragists who introduced her to the movement.
From the Pankhursts, Alice learned methods of protest that she would continue to use for several years.
She began by passing out newspapers to spread the word of suffrage. Later, she would use stronger methods. She would dress up as a scrub woman, break into government meetings, and yell,
"What about votes for women? What will you do for women's suffrage?"
However, suffragists were greatly opposed in England as well as America, and Alice was jailed several times there. During one of her times in the London police station, she met Lucy Burns, who would later become one of her allies in the movement.
I noticed that Miss Burns had a little American flag pin on her coat, so I went up to her, and we became great friends, allies, and comrades.
Hello, I'm Lucy Burns. What's your name?
I'm Alice Paul. Nice to meet you. I was sent here for protesting for suffrage with the Pankhursts. We were going to interview the Prime Minister. I had no idea we would be jailed.
Well, how interesting. I was also sent here for protesting for suffrage.
Oh, perhaps we could work together sometime.
Alice and Lucy became great colleagues, and in 1910, they moved back to America together.
The movement is a sort of mosaic. Each of us puts in one little stone, and then you get a great mosaic at the end. Alice Paul. When Alice and Lucy moved back to America, they joined the NASA together, and in 1913, Alice was elected to be the chair of the Congressional branch.
One of the most influential things Alice did while a part of the NASA was a parade she held the day before President Wilson's inauguration in 1913. The parade was strongly opposed, and many people crowded the streets to block the suffragist progress.
After the parade, the NASA received much publicity from newspaper articles about the parade and the people attempting to prevent it. However, as time went by, tensions grew between Alice, Lucy, and the leader of NASA, Carrie Chapman Catt.
Carrie and Alice had opposing views on how to approach women's suffrage. While Alice wanted to take the matter to Congress, Carrie wished to focus on the states. Also, Carrie wanted to use less militant protest strategies. These differences eventually forced Alice and Lucy to leave the NASA.
In 1917, Alice, Lucy, and many of their colleagues formed the National Woman's Party, or the NWP. Inez Milholland, an NWP member, left for Los Angeles to give a speech for suffrage.
Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty?
In the middle of her speech, Inez collapsed from exhaustion and was rushed to the hospital. She died 1 month later. As a tribute, the NWP created protest signs featuring her famous last words and used them with protest. The National Women's Party is made up of women of all races, creeds, and nationalities working together on the one principle of working to raise the status of women. Alice Paul.
In 1917, the party knew they had to do something drastic to make a change.
After the United States entered World War I on April 2nd, anti-suffragists believed the suffragists would never protest during wartime.
However, Alice did not give up. She and the party decided to controversially picket the White House, something that had never been done before.
We began for 8 hours a day, protesting by holding signs with messages, including Inez's famous last words.
We were first arrested on the charge of obstructing traffic. We were taken to the Occoquan Workhouse in Virginia, where we served harsh treatment far beyond our charges. Alice was sentenced to stay for 7 months.
In jail, I was sent to a psychiatric ward. I think they were trying to discredit me, so that the other leaders of the party would say, well, we better sort of disown this crazy person. But they didn't. I was force-fed 3 times a day through a tube up my nose. It was incredibly uncomfortable. This went on for weeks.
While Alice and the others suffered in jail, they began to protest for their release. On November 15, 1917, they were brutally beaten and abused by the guards.
Lucy was even handcuffed to the top of her cell and forced to hang there overnight.
This night is now known as the Night of Terror.
After these awful events, the suffragists remained undaunted. On November 27th and 28th, they were finally released from jail, and in January 1918, President Woodrow Wilson announced his support for suffrage. The movement had never looked brighter. We, women of America, tell you that America is not a democracy. 20 million women are denied the right to vote. Alice Paul.
On June 4th, 1919, Alice, Lucy, and millions of women all over the country rejoiced. Because of the combined efforts of the NWP and the NASA, Congress had finally decided to pass the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote.
The 19th Amendment states that the right of citizens of the United States shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. This amendment was ratified by 36 states, the exact number needed to ratify it at the time on August 26, 1920.
In 1923, Alice wrote the Equal Rights Amendment, or the ERA.
I believed it was the next step in guaranteeing justice under the law for all citizens, male and female. I kept fighting for it for the rest of my life.
In Alice's later years, she suffered many health problems. She even suffered a debilitating stroke in 1974. Despite her failing health, Alice kept fighting. Around this time, 35 states had ratified the ERA, just 3 short of the required number. To this day, the ERA has still not been ratified.
Alice died in 1977 at the age of 87, but her legacy still lives on. Alice Paul was an extremely influential figure in the women's rights movement.
Her militant protest strategies were uniquely effective in gaining women the right to vote.
Alice's efforts and the efforts of other organizations, like the NASA, helped to pass 2 amendments to help women be treated as equals to men.
Alice worked with the Quakers, the NASA, and created the National Women's Party to help fight for the rights she believed women deserved. Because of Alice, women have the right to vote, and we live in a more equal society today.
Alice even had an institute founded in her name for the things she did. Her face was also put on a special $10 coin. Alice Paul was an American hero who deserves to be recognized for her work in women's rights.
Alice Paul was part of first wave feminism. Second wave feminism occurred in the 1960s and 70s and was based around women's liberation. We are in third wave feminism today. Although Alice worked tirelessly throughout her life for equality, we haven't quite achieved her dream.
But we will keep fighting, with Alice Paul and everything she did as our inspiration, until the day that women and men are not seen as just women and men, but as equal humans.
Alice Paul's leadership as a revolutionary suffragist left a legacy of inspiration and a dream of equality.
I never doubted that equal rights was the right direction. Most reforms, most problems are complicated. But to me, there's nothing complicated about ordinary equality. Alice Paul, an iron-jawed angel.
Thank you. Just to in class periods.
Why did you pick this topic?
Well, actually, in the beginning we were very interested in powerful women and women's rights, and so I actually asked my friend if she knew of any powerful women. She goes to different schools, but researched her a little earlier, and we found out some more about her, and we were very interested.
Yeah, so we decided to do Alice Paul for our project. So
We hadn't.
no, we hadn't.
We were originally going to do, what was her name?
I think her name was Victoria Woodhull, who was the first woman to run for president, and so that was an interesting topic for us. But then when we discovered Alice Paul, we realized that it was a very interesting topic for us to do this.
What do you think more than anything sets Alice Paul apart from other suffragists?
We talked about her protest strategies quite often, and because she was a Quaker, her protest strategies were completely peaceful, but they were also quite aggressive and more militant than the strategies of Carrie Chapman Catt or Vanessa. And so I think if it weren't for that, it would have been a much harder battle to get the vote.
Yeah, also, I feel like, since I'd never heard of Alice Paul before, it's more of like a secret chapter of history that's not read about or learned about as much. But she was actually a very remarkable woman who did so many amazing things, and she even went through terrible things like the hunger strikes that she went through in jail when she was force-fed, and just the amazing things that she did and endured for suffrage.
And what are your main sources of research? Or
I
your
think,
number one source?
I'll say, I guess. I talked about the Alice Paul Institute a little bit at the end of our class, and so we got an interview over Skype with the director of programs at the Alice Paul Institute. Her name is Chris Myers, and she really provided us with a lot of thorough information that we had never really heard before about the research she did, a lot of stuff about the ERA, and also some of the beginning of the suffrage movement before Alice Paul and how it started. And also she provided us with a documentary from the Alice Paul Institute that was like a short 13-minute documentary that was also
Go ahead.
Oh, you mentioned that you learned an awful lot from that interview. What do you think was the most surprising thing that you learned from that interview?
She told us about, I think Alice's strategies when she would dress up as like a janitor and break into government meetings and yell, "What about votes for women? What will you do for women's suffrage?" And I thought that was really interesting because it was like this whole other side to her that we hadn't even thought about. And I think that is a really good example of her peaceful but aggressive strategies.
that was really interesting to us and really surprising. It's kind of like a spy movie kind of thing, like a really cool thing to go undercover and then break in and ask people about suffrage. So she was like really dedicated, and she did all these amazing things to fight for suffrage.
So tell us a little bit more about how you developed your presentation, your performance. What were you thinking of when you wrote it, and what were some of the motivations that you had in writing it the way you did?
Do you want to take this or should I? Okay, well, something you might have noticed is that we had a quote at the beginning of every scene, and we thought that would be effective in building her character and building like her frame of reference, and so we thought that was important for our script, so we put those in the beginning of every scene.
And another thing, we both did performances last year in History Day, and so they were fairly successful performances. So we kind of drew on some of the information we learned last year on how to set up a performance, and we did kind of a similar structure throughout it. So that was something that helped us with our experience.
So do you think, how relative is Alice Paul to today? How do you think today is her significance for today?
Sure. Okay, so I was talking about the different waves of feminism in the last scene, and I think that is one really big impact she had in the women's rights movement, because if first wave feminism hadn't been successful or hadn't occurred, then second wave feminism couldn't have happened, third wave feminism couldn't have happened, and because of that, women have the right to vote and live in a much more equal society.
Yeah, and because of Alice Paul and the original suffrage movement, and like you said, fostering the other waves of feminism, and we're still fighting for equality today with the equal pay for equal work and things like that, and just fighting for more feminism. And so Alice Paul, I feel like, kind of inspired that, and she also like started feminism movements with the first wave of feminism that she was a part of.
That's great. Thanks, Rose.
Thank you.